My name is Eleanor Shaw. I was 66 years old, standing on the sidewalk beside my husband of 43 years, watching strangers carry our life out of the only home we had ever owned. Two moving trucks sat at the curb, their back doors yawning open. Men in matching gray shirts moved in and out of my front door the way water moves through a broken dam. Steady, indifferent, unstoppable. One of them, a young man with kind eyes and a clipboard, paused beside me. "Ma'am," he said politely, "are you here to pick something up before we finish?" I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said quietly. "I think you're taking everything." He frowned, glanced at his list, and moved on. He did not know. Why would he? To him, this was a Tuesday, an address, a job that ended at dusk. To me, it was 43 Christmases, a kitchen where I had taught 2 hands to crack an egg, a doorway I had measured a growing boy against in pencil. Our son had done this, and the $100 bill he would soon fold into my palm would one day be worth more to me than the house he sold. The front door opened again, and this time it was Grant, our boy. 41 now, though for one dizzy second I saw him at 9, running down these same porch steps with a scraped knee. He stopped when he saw us. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hi, Dad." That was all. No embrace, no explanation. Just 2 greetings, offered the way you'd greet someone you'd bumped into at the grocery store. And he would not look at his father. I noticed it before I noticed anything else. The way Grant's eyes slid past Walter and fixed on the pavement, on the truck, on the sky, on anything that was not the man who had taught him to hold a hammer. A guilty man argues, a frightened man looks away. I did not understand yet what my son was so afraid of. I only knew that he was. I turned to my husband. Walter had built half the furniture inside that house with his own hands. For 43 years, he had been the steady thing in every room. The man who could fix a hinge, a leak, a bad day, a crying child. Oak, I used to call him, when I wanted to make him blush. Solid oak. Now Oak stood on the sidewalk of the home he'd paid off years ago and said nothing at all. His jaw worked. His hands, those broad, capable hands, trembled at his sides. Of everything they carried out that afternoon, that was the thing that broke me. Not the house, his hands. Then 2 of the men came through the door carrying the rocking chair. Walter had given me that chair on our 40th anniversary. He'd built it in secret over one long winter, out in the cold garage, telling me he was just tinkering. It had a particular voice, a soft, low creak on the 3rd rock, always the 3rd. I would know that chair in the dark by the sound it made. I watched it disappear into the belly of the truck, and I did not cry, because some losses are too large for the body to answer right away. A car door shut. Vanessa came down the walk, our daughter-in-law, in expensive sunglasses and spotless white sneakers, a woman dressed for a drive, not a goodbye. "We need to get on the road before dark," she said. Not to us, to Grant. As if we were furniture too, already loaded. Grant crossed to me and pressed an envelope into my hand. It was thin. I opened it there on the sidewalk. Inside was a single crisp $100 bill, and folded beside it, a torn piece of notebook paper. 4 words in my son's handwriting. "You'll figure it out." I read it once. I read it again. I read it a 3rd time the way you reread a word in a language you're sure you've misunderstood. There was nothing else. No address, no apology, no page 2. I looked up at my son. "Where are we supposed to sleep tonight?" Grant said nothing, and the silence answered for him. 6 weeks earlier, Walter had gone into the hospital for a knee replacement. A knee. Not a heart, not a diagnosis with a countdown attached. A worn-out joint that a surgeon could swap for a new one. It was routine, the kind of thing you recover from. Before the surgery, Grant had come to us with a folder and a pen. "It's just so I can handle the bills while you heal, Dad," he'd said. "Insurance, the pharmacy, all the boring stuff, so you two don't have to worry about anything." Power of attorney. Walter signed it without reading every line, because you don't read the fine print when the hand offering the pen is your own son's. The recovery ran slow. Walter's insurance approved a short stay at a rehabilitation center 2 towns over, and I rented a room nearby to be close to him. For 6 weeks, our whole world shrank to a physical therapy gym and a motel with thin walls. We were learning how to walk again. We weren't watching the house. That was all the time it took. While we counted steps down a hospital corridor, Grant took that folder, the one meant for pharmacy copays, and used it to sell the house out from under us. The closing was done before we ever drove home. Escrow settled while we were gone. We came back to strangers and trucks. And here is the part I could not make sense of. Standing on that sidewalk, the house was paid off, free and clear for years. There was no mortgage to escape, no debt clawing at our door. Selling it hadn't saved anyone from anything. It had simply turned 4 decades of our life into a check and handed that check to our son. I remember looking at Grant's face as the men worked and catching something underneath the guilt, a tightness around the eyes. A man doing math in his head over and over. He's worried about money, I thought, but that made no sense. He'd just come into more than we'd ever had at once. I pushed the thought away. I told myself I was imagining it. I was wrong to push it away, but I wouldn't understand that for 14 years. Vanessa checked her watch. "Look," she said, in the reasonable voice people use right before they say something unforgivable. "We're giving you 2 your independence. Not everyone your age gets to make a fresh start." Independence, I repeated. The word tasted strange. I didn't know becoming homeless was a kind of independence. She didn't answer. She'd already turned back toward the car. Across the street, a door banged open, and Rosa Alvarez came hurrying over, her housecoat flapping, her eyes rimmed red. Rosa had lived beside us for 30 years. She'd brought us tamales every Christmas and cried at Walter's retirement party. She stopped a few feet away, and I saw her lift her phone and hold it up, steady, toward the trucks and the open door. I thought her hands were simply shaking. I thought she didn't know what to do with them. It never occurred to me she was recording, that a woman in a housecoat was quietly gathering the only evidence anyone would ever keep of that afternoon. She looked past me, straight at my son. "Grant," she said. Her voice did not tremble. "I hope your boy never learns this from you." Grant flinched. For just a moment, before he climbed into the truck, he crossed to the duffel bag that held his father's clothes, and he slipped something inside it, fast, the way a child hides a stolen cookie. I didn't see what. Months later, unpacking that bag in a place I could not yet imagine, I would find it. Our wedding photograph, the one that had hung in the hall, the single thing he'd saved from the sale and never told a soul. Even then, I would learn, my son still had a heart. It was only his courage that had failed. Then the engines started. One truck pulled away, then the other, then the car. In 20 minutes, 43 years went down the street. Only tire tracks remained on the warm asphalt. That night, we slept in Walter's old pickup at a truck stop outside Columbus, 2 backs against worn upholstery. I took his hand in the dark. "We will figure it out, Walt," I whispered. "But not the way our son thinks." The first morning after, I brushed my teeth at a sink in a truck stop restroom while 18-wheelers rumbled past the cinder block wall. The fluorescent light hummed. A trucker nodded at me on his way out, and I nodded back as if this were ordinary, as if I had not slept sitting up in a pickup at 66. When I came back to the truck, Walter was still in the driver's seat, staring through the windshield at nothing. That frightened me more than the sidewalk had. My husband had spent his whole life fixing things. A cracked hinge, a warped drawer, a flooded basement. Hand him a problem with edges and he'd have it mended by supper. But this had no hinge. There was nothing here to sand or clamp or tighten. For the first time in 43 years, I watched him hold a broken thing in his hands and have no idea where to begin. He looked lost, and a lost man was a stranger to me. My phone rang before either of us had spoken. A number I didn't know. "Mrs. Shaw, this is Denise Coleman. I was your husband's discharge coordinator at the rehab center." A pause, careful. "Ma'am, I'm calling because something in his file wasn't right. Our records show a safe discharge to a home address. That home sold 2 days ago. I've been doing this work 11 years, and I need to tell you plainly what I'm looking at." I stepped away from the truck. "All right. This is elder financial exploitation. It's a crime in Ohio. If you come in and sign the affidavit, I will file it tomorrow, and your son could be prosecuted." She let it sit. "You have every right. I'll have the paperwork ready." We drove to her office that afternoon because I needed Walter to hear it too. To know we were not helpless, that the law had a door and we could walk through it. Denise slid a single sheet across the desk. One signature. That was all it would take to turn our son into a defendant. Walter looked at it for a long time. Then he laid his broad hand flat over the page, the way you'd cover a candle against a draft. He didn't sign it. He didn't tear it up. He simply folded it in half and in half again and slid it into the breast pocket of his shirt over his heart. "I lost a house," he said. His voice was rough but steady for the first time since the sidewalk. "I won't lose the boy too, even if he lost us." I didn't argue. I understood him completely. That night, when he was asleep, I took the folded paper from his pocket and pressed it between the pages of my Bible in the book of Luke, and I told myself I would never need it again. A few days later, I made myself drive back to the old neighborhood. Not to look at the house. I couldn't have borne that. But because 43 years of mail still knew no other address. The new owner, a young woman with a baby on her hip, met me at the door with an apology and a rubber-banded stack of envelopes. "These kept coming," she said gently. "I didn't know where to send them." I sorted through them in the truck. Bills, ads, and there, near the bottom, a plain government envelope. Walter's Social Security check. The first honest dollar we would hold in our own hands since the world tipped over. It was not much. It would not buy back a single day, but I sat in that pickup and held it like something sacred because dignity I was earning does not come back all at once. It comes back one small, lawful, ordinary piece at a time. That Sunday we went where people go when they have nowhere else. A church Walter and I had visited for years. Pastor Dale recognized me before I reached the steps, and something in my face stopped his greeting cold. He listened for an hour without once interrupting. The church owned a small apartment above the old fellowship hall, empty just then. He wouldn't hear of rent. Instead, Walter offered the only currency he had left, his hands. He would fix whatever the building needed. Pastor Dale shook on it. That evening, for the first time in weeks, we slept under a roof. Walter started with the church. He began the way he always did, with the small broken things nobody else noticed. A sticking door in the vestibule, a pew that groaned when the choir stood, a cabinet in the Sunday school room with a hinge hanging by one screw. He worked quietly, early, before the building filled with voices. And I watched something happen that I have never forgotten. Every hinge he tightened, a little of him came back. The man who had stared through a windshield at nothing was returning to himself. One turned screw at a time. His hands stopped trembling. His jaw was unclenched. Fixing the world, it turned out, was how my husband fixed himself. Word of it began with a rocking chair. An elderly woman came into the fellowship hall one afternoon carrying a chair with one broken leg, cradling it like an injured pet. "I heard there's a man here who can fix anything," she said. Her husband had built that chair 50 years ago, before he passed. Walter turned it over in his hands, read the joinery the way I read a page. Solid oak, good bones. "I think I can help," he told her. She asked what he charged. Walter shrugged. $20? She looked almost offended. "That's all? For work like this?" 3 days later, she came back, not with payment, but with her sister and her sister's neighbor and a woman from another church across town, each of them carrying something wounded and beloved. That was how it started, not with a plan, with a chair and a widow who thought his price was too low. Within a month, our little apartment looked more like a workshop than a home, chairs and cabinets lined against every wall. A retired mechanic named Earl heard about it after Sunday service. "I've got an old garage outside town, just sitting empty," he said. "Front bays are yours if you want them." Walter started to say he couldn't afford commercial rent, and Earl waved him off. "Then don't pay it. Fix the place up. Stay till you're on your feet." No lease, no lawyers. Just two men shaking hands in a church parking lot. Two people who still believed a handshake meant something. The garage had good bones too, under all the dust. Walter cleaned and painted and built shelves, and the customers followed. They came carrying the damaged and the grieving over. A dining table scorched down one side by a house fire, a cedar chest swollen with floodwater, a dresser gone gray with mold and neglect. Everyone else had told them these things were beyond saving, not worth the cost. Walter never said that. He treated a battered nightstand the same as a museum piece, because every one of them carried somebody's whole life in its grain. One evening, a young woman wept when he handed back her grandmother's chest, restored. "It looks exactly like I remember," she said. Walter shook his head. "No, ma'am. It looks like your grandmother remembered it." Later, wiping down his tools, he said the only thing he ever said about the work out loud. "We don't restore wood, Nell. We restore what people were afraid they'd lost." I found my own place in it without meaning to. I had taught school for 30 years, and old habits woke back up. I began keeping the books, writing down each piece and its story, answering the letters that started to arrive. When Walter took on more than his hands could manage, it was I who taught the newcomers how to listen to a customer, how to hold grief across a counter without flinching. He rebuilt the furniture. I rebuilt the people who brought it. Two halves of one repair. Our first hire was a young man named Isaiah, a veteran who'd come home from overseas and couldn't find steady work anywhere. He showed up early, asked good questions, and had the kind of patience the work demands. Walter taught him joints. I taught him the rest. And through all of it, in every secondhand store and estate sale and dusty consignment shop I passed, I looked for one thing: a rocking chair with a low creak on the third rock. I never stopped looking. I told no one, not even Walter. Some hopes are too tender to say aloud. So I carried it quietly and kept my eyes on every doorway, waiting. By the end of that first year, the faded sign over the garage still read Earl's Auto. It didn't fit anymore. One spring morning, Walter hung a new one he'd carved by hand, and we stood back in the gravel to look at it together. Shaw Heritage Restoration. He rubbed the edge of the wood with his thumb. "Never thought I'd put our name on anything again," he said. I took his arm. It was always worth putting somewhere. The name changed something. Or maybe the name only caught up to what was already true. Within months, Isaiah walked into the office with a clipboard and a puzzled look. "We're booked 6 months out," he said. 6 months. People were driving 2-3 hours to reach us. And then, one Saturday, a family from Virginia arrived after 8 hours on the road. A scarred blanket chest strapped carefully in the bed of their truck. They'd heard somehow that the folks in Ohio could make broken things whole again. Walter leaned back in his chair and grinned at me. "I suppose we'd better get to work." Then came the black SUV. A sharply dressed woman stepped out carrying a leather portfolio, and Isaiah muttered, "She looks expensive." Her name was Diane Marsh, an interior designer from Cleveland. One of her clients had bought a mansion built in the 1870s, and nearly every original piece inside needed saving. She asked if we'd be interested and opened the portfolio. "How many pieces?" Walter asked. She didn't look up. 37. I nearly dropped my coffee. It was the largest thing anyone had ever asked of us. Walter studied the photographs for 2 full days before he said yes, because, he told me, most people don't understand what they're promising when they promise it. The project took 9 months. Every table, every carved headboard, every chair with a story pressed into its arms. When it was finished and the owner walked those restored rooms in silence, he turned to Walter with wet eyes. "My grandfather would have cried." Word of that house traveled farther than any advertisement we could have bought. Hotels called, a historical society called. We had, without ever intending to, become something with a name people trusted. But we had more work than hands, and that was the beginning of the part I am proudest of. We couldn't just hire workers. Anyone can sand a board. Not everyone understands why an 80-year-old widow weeps over a rocking chair, returned exactly as she remembered it. So we started an apprenticeship, and I knew, the moment we did, exactly whom I wanted to find. Young men and women aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. Veterans, like Isaiah, home and unmoored. Single parents working 2 jobs and losing. People the world had quietly decided were disposable. I know that feeling now. I had stood on a sidewalk and been handed $100 and told to figure it out. I would not let them stand there alone. I ran the program myself. That was my workshop, the way the lathe was Walter's. On their first day, every apprentice asked some version of the same question. What exactly are we making here? And I always gave them the same answer. We're not in the furniture business, I'd say. We're in the memory business. Then I'd watch it land, watch a kid who'd been told his whole life that he was too damaged to be worth much, and realize he'd just been hired to make damaged things worthy again. They saw themselves in every piece. So did I. A scorched table isn't ruined. It's a table that survived a fire and has the marks to prove it. I said that to the furniture. I meant it about the people. That Christmas, the local paper ran a small human interest piece. Retired couple gives family heirlooms a second life. Nothing dramatic. A photo of Walter at the bench, of me with 3 apprentices, of a dresser half-stripped and waiting. The reporter asked what had inspired us to start. I answered as honestly as I could, without saying the whole of it. "We know what it's like," I said, "to lose something you were sure you'd have forever." Business doubled after that article ran. But it wasn't the money that changed us. It was the letters that started to come, from strangers who read 6 sentences about an old couple and a workshop, and somehow heard their own grief in it. The local television station came first, a short feature, 3 minutes on the evening news. Walter almost said no. He had never liked a camera pointed at him. But Isaiah talked him into it, and those 3 minutes brought a documentary crew to our door 6 months later. They were filming a streaming series about ordinary Americans keeping traditional crafts alive. A blacksmith in Tennessee, a boat builder in Maine, and now 2 people in Ohio who put broken furniture back together. They followed us for nearly 2 weeks. Mostly, I forgot the cameras were there. Then, near the end, the interviewer sat Walter down under the lights and asked him a question I don't think either of us was ready for. "Have you ever lost something you loved?" The room went very still. I watched my husband's hands fold in his lap, those steady hands, and I saw him decide to tell the truth. 14 years ago, he said quietly. He looked down. Someone left me with $100 and a note that said I'd figure it out. The interviewer waited. And did you? Walter was quiet for a long moment. Then he lifted his head, and he said the words that would travel farther than we ever imagined. No one can sell your future. They can sell your house. They can take your things. They can walk away. But they cannot decide who you become after they leave. He never said a name. He never pointed a finger. It wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about what grows back. But something in the plainness of it, in the way an old man said it without bitterness, reached through the screen and took people by the collar. The documentary premiered on a Sunday. By Tuesday, the letters had become a flood. They came from everywhere. A widow in Arizona who'd been written off by her children. A veteran who'd slept in his car for a winter. A divorced father who hadn't seen his kids in years. A woman finishing chemotherapy alone. They didn't write to thank us for furniture. Most of them would never own a piece we'd touched. They wrote to thank us for hope, for proof in an ordinary workshop that a life could be counted out for dead and rise anyway. I answered every letter I could. It felt like the most important work I had ever done, and I had been a teacher for 30 years. The money came too, more than we had ever had. And here is the part people never quite believe. Almost nothing about us changed. Walter still drove the same battered pickup with 200,000 miles on it, the one we'd slept in that first night. He still swept the workshop floor himself every evening after everyone else went home. Because, he said, a man who won't hold his own broom has forgotten where he came from. I still packed our lunches in the morning, the same as I had when a sandwich was all we could afford. We had learned exactly what money was worth, and it was not worth our dignity. We had bought that back too dearly to trade it now. One afternoon, a letter arrived that was different from the rest. It came from the state, from the Department of Job and Family Services. They were looking for businesses willing to mentor young adults aging out of foster care, the very kids I'd been quietly hiring all along. I read it 3 times. Then, I looked around the workshop at Isaiah, teaching a nervous teenager how to hold a plane, and I thought about a sidewalk and $100, and the particular loneliness of wondering whether anyone would notice if you simply disappeared. No one, I said to Walter that night, should begin their adult life feeling disposable. We signed on the next morning. I believed, by then, that our story had found its shape, that the wound had closed over and left something useful in its place. I was wrong, not about the good we were doing, but about the story being finished. Because I never imagined that one quiet interview, filmed in a dusty Ohio garage, would travel 700 miles south, to a boy who shared our name and had never once been told who we were. I did not see any of what happened next. I learned it later, months later, from Caleb himself, sitting across a workbench with his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. But I have turned it over so many times since that it plays in my mind as if I had been standing in that kitchen in North Carolina myself. It began, of all things, with homework. Caleb was 18 that autumn, a senior, and his American history teacher assigned the whole class the same project: research a family member who made a difference in their community. Most kids chose a grandfather who'd served, a grandmother who'd taught, someone easy and close. Caleb had almost nothing to go on. His mother's parents lived in Florida and sent birthday cards. As for his father's side, there was only fog. A few scattered images from when he was very small. A deep, warm laugh, a wooden toy train that fit exactly in his hand. The memory of being lifted onto a pair of broad shoulders when he was maybe 4 years old, high enough to touch a doorframe. He didn't even know whose shoulders they were. So, at dinner, he asked, "Dad, what about Grandpa? Didn't I have grandparents up north?" The room, he told me, went quiet in a way he didn't understand. Grant didn't look up from his plate. "It's complicated," he said. "We lost touch a long time ago." And Vanessa, too quickly, set down her fork and asked whether Caleb had picked a college yet, the way you change a channel. But Caleb was 18, and teenagers are never more curious than when the adults suddenly won't answer a simple question. That night, he opened his laptop and typed 2 words: Walter Shaw. The first result was a website, Shaw Heritage Restoration, Preserving America's Family History. The second was a magazine profile, From a Sidewalk to a Legacy, then another and another. A television segment, a documentary, photographs of an old man beside young apprentices, articles about a scholarship program, awards, a speech at a conference. He typed the other name too, Eleanor Shaw, and there I was, standing beside 3 foster kids in a workshop, smiling. Hein told me the strangest part was that he didn't believe it. "I thought maybe there were 2 Walter Shaws," he said. It was easier than thinking the grandfather nobody would talk about was somebody people wrote articles about. He couldn't make the 2 men fit inside one name. Then he clicked the documentary. Hai watched for almost an hour in the dark, earbuds in, the house asleep around him. Near the end came the interview. An old man under the lights, hands folded, saying someone left me with $100 and a note that said I'd figure it out. And Caleb froze, because he had heard that phrase before. Years earlier, small, half-listening from another room, he'd caught his father say it into a phone in a low, dismissive voice. "They'll figure it out." He hadn't understood it then. He understood it now. He sat in the blue light of the screen and felt the whole shape of it come together at once. The note, the $100, the grandparents who'd vanished, the father who wouldn't meet his eyes at dinner. He played the interview again and again. He did not sleep. The next morning, Grant came downstairs to find his son already at the kitchen table, the laptop open, and turned to face him. On the screen, paused, was his own father's face. Caleb said his father stopped in the doorway as if he'd walked into glass. All the color drained out of him. He set his hand on the back of a chair to steady himself and lowered into it very slowly, the way a man sits down when his knees have quit. And then, Caleb had never seen this in his life, not at any funeral, not through any hardship. His father put both hands over his face and wept. Vanessa came in a moment later with her coffee, saw the screen, and stopped. The mug shook in her hand. She said nothing at all. For a long time, no one in that kitchen spoke. The documentary sat frozen between them, an old man's steady face filling the room like a verdict. Then Caleb, very quietly, asked the question that would finally break 14 years of silence. "Is that Grandma and Grandpa?" He looked at his father. "Was that you? Were you the one who left them the $100? The first call came to the workshop on a Thursday. Isaiah answered it, the way he answered every call. Shaw Heritage Restoration. There was a pause on the line, a breath that didn't become words for a moment. Then a man's voice, unsteady. "Is Walter Shaw there? Or Eleanor?" Isaiah asked who was calling. Another silence, longer. And then so quietly he almost missed it. "I'm their son." Isaiah told me later he could hear the whole of it in those 3 words. The shame, the 14 years, all of it pressing behind them. He didn't put the call through. He walked back to the bench where I was working, set the phone down in front of me, and said, "You should know who that was." When he told me, I kept standing. I didn't trust my hands to hold anything else just then. Then the calls began in earnest. Grant called again an hour later, then again that evening. The next morning there were more. I stopped counting for a day, and when I looked, my phone showed 23 missed calls. By the following afternoon, it was 68. Voicemails filled the box faster than I could have deleted them, had I wanted to. "Please call. We need to talk." I'm sorry. We're so sorry. Melissa's, no. Vanessa's voice appeared among them, and numbers I didn't know. 140 by the end of the week. And then, one gray morning, I turned the phone over on the workbench, and the screen read 217. I did not answer a single one, not because I hated my son. I want to be clear about that, because I know how it looks. I wasn't punishing him. I wasn't savoring anything. It was something quieter and, I think, more honest than revenge. For 14 years, Grant had decided everything. When we would leave, where we would go, what we were worth. He had never once asked what we wanted. And now, for the first time since that sidewalk, the choosing was ours. After 14 years, I said to Walter, we finally get to decide when the conversation begins. He nodded. He understood. He always did. So, the calls went unanswered, all of them, until one was different. It came late on the 8th day, not Grant, not Vanessa. A young voice, unsure, cracking on the second sentence. Hi, this is Caleb, your grandson. A long breath. I'm not calling about money. I don't want anything from you, I promise. The voice wavered and steadied. I'd like to know the two people everyone else seems to admire. I listened to it 3 times. Then, I carried the phone out onto the workshop floor, where the afternoon light came slanting through the high windows. 2 of our apprentices, kids who'd aged out of foster care with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes, were laughing over a half-sand dresser, dust hanging gold in the air around them. I stood and watched them for a while. For years, I had told every one of them the same thing on their first difficult day, when they wanted to blame themselves for wounds they hadn't made. Children don't inherit guilt. I had said it 100 times to other people's children. I hadn't once thought to say it about my own grandson. That night, at the little table in our apartment, I did something I had not done in 14 years. I took down my Bible, and I opened it to the book of Luke. And I drew out the folded affidavit, the single sheet that could have sent Grant to prison, the one Walter had pressed to his heart and I had hidden away and never touched again. It was soft now at the creases, worn thin from being carried across a decade without ever being read. I unfolded it on the table and smoothed it flat with my palm. I didn't know yet what I meant to do with it. I only knew that it was time to take it out into the light. Walter watched me and said nothing. Some decisions a person has to arrive at alone, at their own table, in their own time. In the morning, we agreed to meet him, Caleb, only Caleb for now, and we would meet him not at a restaurant, not on neutral ground, but here, at the workshop. If the boy wanted to know who his grandparents were, he would have to see the place that had built us back from nothing. He came alone on a Saturday morning, in a silver car that pulled slowly into the gravel lot as though unsure of its welcome. I watched from the doorway as a tall, thin young man got out and stood a moment, taking in the building, the sign, the old pickup by the fence. Then he saw me, and he smiled, and my breath caught. It was Grant's smile, the very one, only softer somehow, without the thing that had hardened in his father over the years, kinder. For a moment, none of us knew what to do. Walter came up beside me, wiping his hands on a rag out of pure habit. Caleb took a step forward and said, I practiced this all the way here, and now I can't remember any of it. Walter laughed first, that low laugh Caleb would tell me he half remembered from being 4 years old. And then all 3 of us were laughing, the awkward, watery kind, and the ice was simply gone. He didn't hug us. We didn't ask him to. We shook hands, and that was right. I showed him everything. The finishing room, the lathe, the long benches, the wall of letters from strangers. Apprentices stopped to introduce themselves. Morning, Mr. Shaw. Morning, Miss Eleanor. And I saw him notice how they looked at us. We stopped at a heavy oak dining table near the back, One side of it charred black, the grain scorched and blistered. "What happened to this one?" he asked. "House fire," Walter said. "The family thought it was gone, but the wood underneath is sound." He ran a palm over the burned edge. "It'll always carry the scar, so we don't hide it. We make the scar part of the story." Caleb looked at it for a long time. "I think that's kind of beautiful," he said. "It's true for people too," I told him. And he glanced at me, and I saw that he understood I was not talking about furniture. We sat in the little break room after, and he turned his coffee cup in his hands the way nervous people do. "I need to say something," he said. "I'm sorry for what they did to you, for all of it." His voice broke on the last word. I reached across the table and laid my hand over his. "Caleb, look at me." He did. "You didn't sell our house. You didn't write that note. You were 4 years old." I pressed his hand. "Children don't inherit guilt. Not their parents, not anyone's. Do you hear me?" He nodded and wiped his face with the back of his wrist, and for a moment he looked exactly like the little boy on the shoulders he couldn't quite remember. I don't know how long we sat there, but at some point another vehicle turned into the lot, and I knew before I looked. I hadn't invited them. Somehow I wasn't surprised. Grant stepped out first. Vanessa followed, several feet behind, the way she'd walked ahead of us once and now trailed. 14 years had not been kind to my son. His hair had gone gray, his shoulders had caved inward, and he crossed the gravel slowly, like a man approaching his own sentencing. Whatever life he'd bought with our house, it had cost him more than it gave. Life had been less generous to him than he'd expected. He stopped a few feet from me. For a moment, he couldn't speak at all. Then it came out of him in pieces. "There was debt," he said. "A business I sank. I never told you. I never told anyone." He couldn't look at Walter. "I was drowning, and Vanessa said the house was the practical solution, that you two would be fine, and I let myself believe it because believing it was easier than telling my own father I'd failed." His jaw worked. "The truth is, I chose convenience over my own parents. I dressed it up as sensible. It was cowardice." And then the thing underneath the thing. The part I had never once guessed in 14 years of imagining this moment. "When you went in for that surgery, Dad," his voice cracked wide open, "I panicked. Mom died slowly. I watched it. And the thought of doing that again, of watching you get old and go, I couldn't. So I ran. I told myself I was setting you free." He was weeping now, openly, a gray-haired man crying in a gravel lot. "I wasn't. I was just running from being afraid." For a long moment, I let him stand there in his weeping. Then I went inside and I came back with the folded paper, and I laid it on the workbench between us. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. Grant shook his head. "It's an affidavit. Elder financial exploitation. For 14 years, one signature on this page could have sent you to prison for what you did to us." He stared at it. "We never signed it. Your father folded it up the week you left and carried it over his heart, and I kept it in my Bible, and neither of us ever spoke your name to the law. You've been living inside a mercy you never even knew was there." The color left his face entirely. I watched him understand it, that for 14 years he had walked free, not because he'd gotten away with anything, but because the two people he had thrown onto a sidewalk had chosen every single day to protect him. Vanessa made a small sound behind him and looked at the floor. "There's more," I said gently. "Rosa recorded it, that morning, all of it. The trucks, the note, everything. She kept the video for 14 years, in case we ever needed it." Grant closed his eyes. I did not lecture him. There was nothing left to say that the paper hadn't already said. Instead, Walter walked to the little wood stove in the corner, opened the door, and set the affidavit inside. We watched it curl and catch and go to ash. Then I took out my phone, and in front of my son I found Rosa's video, and I deleted it. No sermon, no conditions. Just two hands letting go of the only weapons we had ever held over him. Mercy is not weakness. It is the strongest thing a person can do from a position of power. And we did it on purpose where he could see. It was Caleb weeks later who found the chair. A dealer brought us a lot of consignment pieces to restore. And there, among the stranger's furniture, was a rocking chair with a low creak on the third rock. My chair. Walter's 40th anniversary chair. Lost down the street on a moving truck and passed through 14 years of secondhand shops to come home to the one man alive who could recognize its bones. He restored it himself, quietly, over a week. Then he set it by the workshop window in the afternoon light and said nothing at all. I sat down in it, that was all. Some things don't need words. Grant came to me before they drove home and pressed an envelope into my hand, the way he had once pressed a different envelope into it. Inside was a cashier's check for every dollar the house had brought, and 14 years of interest besides. I sold my own house to make it whole, he said. It was never mine. I took it, and the next week we signed it, all of it, into the scholarship fund for kids aging out of foster care, and we named him its founder. Grant would spend the rest of his life attached to a public good built out of his own worst act. That was his sentence. It was also his second chance. Pastor Dale said it best the Sunday I told him what we'd done. Forgiveness doesn't mean you open the door again, he said. It means you stop carrying the key. Healing came slowly after that, the way real things do. Grant called every Sunday, 10 minutes some weeks, 2 hours others. Vanessa wrote me a letter by hand, no email, no excuses, no blaming stress or youth. I wrote back 3 sentences. Thank you for telling the truth. We forgive you. Now I live differently. Caleb learned the trade, and when he graduated college, he didn't ask for an office. He started where every apprentice starts, sweeping floors, sorting lumber. You'll work here, Walter told him, if you earn it. He earned it. We framed the $100 bill and hung it by the door, and beneath it, a small brass plaque. They believed this was enough to end 2 people's futures. They were wrong, and we made the company employee-owned. No child would ever inherit it by blood. The people who built it would hold it together. Losing the house was never the deepest wound. Losing the belief that our own son wanted us, that was the wound. We didn't get our old family back, that one was gone. But something humbler and more honest grew in its place. If someone ever made you feel disposable because of your age, your circumstances, or your past, tell me in the comments. Your story might be the hope someone scrolling tonight is praying for. And if you believe it's never too late to rebuild from what's left in your hands, subscribe. That's exactly the kind of story we tell here, every week.